How old is your garden and how large?
It's been going obviously before we came here in '76, so probably it started off in about the 1920s, but then it was there wasn't such a formal garden. It's probably about 1.5 acres plus a little bit, somewhere between 1.5 acres and 1.75 acres.
So did you design it yourself or did you have a little help?
Mainly myself. I mean, I was inspired by Rose Mcllwham, the plants woman, and a great designer, and she came to visit us, which was very sort of inspiring. And she didn't really. She thought very much in the lines of you must do your own thing in a garden. She didn't want to put any of her own ideas. But she was an inspiration and just such a lovely person, so unpretentious and just great to sort of have around, really. And I was also involved as a trustee of the therapy garden here, and she came to do talks for us for fundraising and things, so we became great friends, really.
But how did you start? Did you draw it or did you just go out and imagine it?
Well, it was partly started off by Dear attacking all our roses, and from then on I went to do a course at Merris Wood and get some ideas from there. And then I did put it down on paper, and I sort of before I could get to sleep at night, I'd madly be thinking of things, and then I'd come down and sort of draw things. And I just love to get different colours and textures together, some clashing, as in with the Great Dixter Garden, and it sort of evolved from there. But I had to put it down on paper because of the various, the direction of the sun and the soil conditions, and then. After we put the knot garden in, we decided we must get roses back in because it somehow seemed to go so well in the setting. And I mean, the house always gives a lovely background for everything. And roses seemed the right thing to do, to put back in as much as we could. And also, I've always wanted it to be a romantic garden. Whether I've achieved it or not, I'm not sure, but that was the main challenge, to have a romantic garden.
The roses seem to be the main theme of the garden. How have you chosen them and which ones, why?
I think probably a lot of them was sort of ideas from going up to Chelsea, from sort of David Austin, from magazines. And I just like the idea in here of roses growing through apple trees and sort of over the garage and just looking fairly natural, sort of shrub roses more than anything else. But to get the sort of setting for them, we had the formality of box around, which I was interested in the winter, but it just formed a sort of backdrop for the roses in each case. And then we just sort of evolved from there, and then we just got more and more sort of roses in all the time. And now I just find it very difficult. Wherever I go, if I see roses, and they're sort of slightly different, and there's so many sort of varieties.
How do you make them grow so tall, over the roof?
Well, I think with David Austin, they've got a fairly sandy soil, and he said provided you sort of put compost in, you don't, roses are at their best in clay, and there's no way with our soil. And so again, he inspired us to make sure feed, and also that the one over the garage is obviously a climber. And that combination of feeding well and watering well, they love a lot of water. Roses are very happy to have their roots as wet as possible. And so that's worked again. We worked to our advantage as well.
Do you have to spray them?
We do. My husband does all of that. We've got a sort of little rota that she does one every sort of fortnight. And it has worked sort of very well because there are obviously a few roses that are affected with black spot or green fly, but we have been very lucky again. Unfortunately we had a bit of honey fungus in, but that was just very sort of unfortunate, and we've replanted, and so hopefully the new bed will grow up as the others in a couple of years' time.
And I see you've used many climbers together with clematis.
Yes, I think to sort of bring out dimensions again, and also when some of the roses only flower once. We've tried to go for roses that flower second time as much as possible, but just to add that little bit of interest, and the contrasting colours, the clematis just work brilliantly sort of together as well.
You have a beautiful herb garden. How have you, or what have you combined there?
Well, it's really more aesthetic. I mean, we do obviously put herbs in, but we started off putting a bay tree sort of in the centre, and sadly we lost that, so we replaced it. And then we put some roses in, and then various herbs. And then we decided we would again outline it, so box came into it again. And then we thought we'd put some obelisks with roses around it. And again, we had the advice of David Austin, Michael Marriott there, and he suggested different roses that would work very well, that they'd be perpetual flowers. And we planted probably the obelisks about 2 years ago, and they've done incredibly well, really. Again, a lot of feeding and tender loving care, I think, really.
I noticed a rhubarb, which was growing from inside a pot, so to say. Mm-hmm. What is this?
Well, it is in my case a little bit the aesthetic value, but if you put a pot on a rhubarb plant sometime in December or January, it forces them, and then you get rhubarb earlier than you would sort of normally. And this is, again, we put the plant in actually early this year, so we can't actually touch it this year. But I'm just very pleased with the results. I mean, rhubarb is very easy to grow, but I mean, it certainly it worked very well with the forcing.
What about maintenance in this garden? How much maintenance do you have to do, or who takes care of it?
Well, with my husband and I do the majority. We do have someone who comes in for a day a week. But to say it isn't anything other than high maintenance would be mad. It is high maintenance, but I mean, we could let it go, but I mean, we just like it to look as it should, really. And so we spend quite a lot of time, sort of up to 12 hours a day, sort of on it. And then once you've got it up to speed, as it were, you can just do a couple of hours of just low maintenance and then another intense sort of period. So I suppose it fairly it dominates a little bit, but the end results are very good, and when people come to visit, it all is very worthwhile, because in the gardening world everybody's so helpful and friendly, and that is so good, very positive aspect.
But how often do you do the edging, the bed edging?
Probably once every 3 weeks. Sometimes when I'm weeding, I just pull the grass off and tidy it up. So if I can do it less than that, it makes it easier. But again, the person who helps us in the garden tends to do that. But we've got about 9 pairs of edging shears to keep them sharp, so we can get round as quickly as possible.
I noticed you have lovely pots, blues and pinkish, and you've coloured them yourself?
Yes, I just thought this year, just for a little sort of change, would be quite nice, and to keep in the sort of tones, because we've got sort of stain on the fencing in blue, so I thought the sort of pinks and blues with the pots would just add a little bit of interest, and we can move the plants and pots around as and where we need them, really. As you know, this year with things moving so fast, you just need to have little supplies of plants that you can substitute all the time.
Your house and garden is called Longer End Cottage, but there's also in the garden Shorter End Cottage. What is this? Who lives there?
Well, when my children were very little, my mother helped buy the little Shorter End Cottage, and the children had great fun sleeping and having friends to stay in there. And it has such sort of fond memories, and also our postman used to deliver the children's post to Shorter End Cottage, and they just thought that was sort of great fun. So it's been with us for a long time now.
What's your favourite spot in the garden or garden room, and when?
I think probably the wildflower meadow, just because I just love the floating, and the grasses go a blue colour sort of from now onwards, and just to sort of in the morning to go across to it, I just love sort of walking through and just seeing different things appear each year, really. It sort of varies. And in July, sort of later on in July, there's a wild carrot which looks a bit like cow parsley, and that is, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but that, I always look forward to seeing if the wild carrot is going to come up.